Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the News Project Live. Tonight's episode, Solving the Local News Crisis. A look inside WNYC, New York Public Radio, the nation's largest public radio station. Our guest is Goli Sheikholeslami, President and CEO of New York Public Radio. The News Project Live is a weekly conversation with media industry experts and innovators about the future of news, brought to you by the News Project. Our hosts are Merrill Brown, CEO of the News Project, and Alex Leo, Head of Audience. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Without further ado, Merrill Brown and Alex Leo.
Good evening from New York City. I'm Merrill Brown of the News Project, and welcome to tonight's edition of the News Project Live. Thursday evenings, me and co-host Alex Leo bring you smart media minds to talk about news industry business issues, those issues that make the future of news gathering and the news organization so challenging. To repeat viewers, welcome and thanks for coming back. And to our new audiences, we hope to hear from you and that you find the program worthwhile. Tonight, we dive into the vital world of public radio with the CEO of NYPR and WNYC. She's Goli Sheikholeslami, and she runs the largest public radio station group in the country. WNYC, in addition, operates WNYC Studios, a podcast production company that's one of the country's most highly successful and highly regarded podcasters, classical radio station WQXR, Gothamist, and New Jersey Public Radio, and produces popular programs like Radiolab. They face challenges during the COVID period as drive time NPR audiences have been declining as people are more at home. But at the same time, radio news is increasingly an important force. And like other public radio stations, they're covering their communities more and more as newspapers like the New York Times cut back on local coverage and papers in other markets shrink or simply disappear. At our company, the News Project, we're working to bring technology and services to small news organizations to help them address the product and business challenges that the news industry faces today. We provide a comprehensive platform and set of technologies the news operations need to put them in a position to build audience and to seek sustainable business models. More on our work later in the program when co-host Alex Leo and I debrief. Alex joins us tonight from her home in Washington, D.C. Good evening, Alex.
Hi, Merrill. Thanks. Welcome to all our viewers. Please tell us where you're watching from, tag your friends to join you in the comments, and leave us your questions for later in the show. Merrill?
Thanks, Alex. Goli Sheikholeslami was born in Kuwait, the daughter of an Iranian diplomat, and emigrated to the United States with her family as political refugees in 1979. She grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, went to Georgetown, and received an MBA from the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia. She worked at Time Warner and Condé Nast before joining the Washington Post as vice president and GM of digital in 2002. She spent over 7 years there before moving to Everyday Health in 2010 as executive vice president, and then moved into public media, becoming the president and CEO of Chicago Public Media, which operates WBEZ, the regional powerhouse there. She joined WNYC last October, taking over for Laura Walker, who ran WNYC for over 2 decades. Goli is a former NPR board member, and earlier this month was cited by the Carnegie Corporation as one of their honorees in their annual list of great immigrants. Goli, welcome. You're where this evening?
I am in New York City.
Well, welcome home. Tell us a little bit about your own lockdown life and lockdown life at WNYC NYPR.
Sure. So we have been in lockdown for about 4 months now. So middle of March, we moved everybody out of our offices in downtown New York. And so I've actually been working out of my apartment for since the end of March. I stayed on site for a couple weeks after everybody else had moved out. And you know, it's been, I have to say, I had been at New York Public Radio for 5 months when the pandemic hit New York. And I think that, we were in the fortunate position of, as a station, we had been through 2 other big crises on 9/11 and during Hurricane Sandy. And so we have an amazing broadcast engineering team and technology team. But I don't think anyone ever imagined that we would be able to operate all of our radio stations and our digital platforms remotely. But, miraculously, really within a matter of a couple weeks, we figured out a way to get mostly everybody there. We have about 400 people that work at New York Public Radio. And we have about 8 or 10 people that still have to go into the office every day in order to keep our broadcast signals live.
Mhm.
But the rest of us moved out, including all of our hosts and all of our live programs. And that was really the most challenging part of building. We built 18 home studios for the 2 stations. And one of the most challenging parts was many of our live shows take live calls. And so figuring out the technology around how you do live calling from a remote perspective. But again, our engineering team just really went above and beyond, and we were able to get everybody out, everybody set up at home, and really have been operating not only our live programs, but also our podcasts and our digital platforms remotely ever since.
So all this happened, Goli, in roughly your 5th month in the job. You walked into a challenging circumstance for sure, although a healthy operation. You succeeded Laura Walker, who, as I mentioned before, was there for over 20 years, had a very high profile. But you, I'm sure, are in the middle of implementing your own vision and plans for WNYC. Share a little bit about that vision with us, if you could.
Sure. I mean, I think that, I came to public radio, really because of my commitment and love and belief in the importance of local news to really keeping our democracy healthy and keeping our communities well informed. And so in many respects, I think that, the vision for New York Public Radio, I think, is really to sort of extend and expand, what Laura built over her tenure of 2 decades. She took a very small, city-run radio station and turned it into the operation it is today. But I think that, the vision, for the station going forward, when I got here in March, one of the first things I talked to the staff about was really working together to craft a vision going forward. And, I actually presented our first set of plans to the board for our fiscal year starts July 1st. So about 6 weeks ago, we presented sort of our plans for our upcoming fiscal year. And I think, the vision is very much tied to the moment that we are living in. And I think, what I've said to the staff and the board is that, I've lived in this country for 40 years. As you said, I was born in Iran, moved here. I was born in Kuwait, but I'm Iranian, moved here after the revolution in Iran. And, I think that from my perspective, I feel that, we are living in a moment in America unlike anything that I have seen in my 40 years here. And I think that, our role as public radio, our role as independent journalism institutions is really about fortifying our democracy and really bringing our community together. We live in a country that is more polarized and there is more inequality in our country, than ever before. And I think that those two factors, along with the fact that the media is also, for the last 10 or 15 years, is going through this great sort of crisis of local journalism. I think that has also exacerbated the problem where people do not have access to information, and do not have access to, and there are no longer healthy newsrooms holding elected officials accountable. And I think that public radio's model is one that actually allows us to invest in and to build healthy newsrooms that can allow us to continue to enable a well-informed citizenry, and sort of act as sort of the foundation of our democracy.
That's great. We want to get to the business model more in just a minute, but first I'd like to say hello to some of our viewers who tell us where they're watching from. Jonathan is in Union Square, New York. Peter is watching from the land of Jefferson Public Radio, Southern Oregon and Northern California. Horatio's in Baltimore. Rebecca in North Carolina, and a special hello to Bill Siemering, one of the founders of NPR, watching from Philadelphia. So I wanted to get to this question from viewer Lisa Napoli. WNYC is unique in that NYC is not a car-dominated commute city the way most major American cities are. With news yesterday from NPR that the network is suffering a loss of listenership during the commute times due to the pandemic, what's the impact on WNYC?
So that is actually a great question, Lisa. And I think that, in many respects, because we're not a big commuting city, the impact on our listenership has not been as great as some other public radio stations have experienced. So, but we have, seen a decline in overall sort of what we call weekly cum, which is the number of people that listen on a weekly basis. But 3/4 of our listening happens in the home, and so that for us has always been a bit of a differentiator, that we have a larger in-home listening audience than most other public radio stations. So, but I think what is interesting is that our share of listening, so overall radio listening has declined, I think, across the country, but actually our share has increased, because I think that, as people are especially in those first few months, March and April, there was just such a need for information that I think that a lot of the music stations were impacted more dramatically than we were. And so we've seen sort of, strong numbers in terms of overall sort of our share of the market, even though total listening has declined. The other thing that has actually been really interesting is, we also measure time spent listening. So it's sort of how many hours a week are people listening. And I think we would average somewhere around 3.5 to 4 hours. And now, we're pushing closer to 5 hours a week. So there's definitely greater engagement with the station during this time.
Goli, fit WNYC and its approach to news into the New York area ecosystem, if you will. It used to be that a newspaper and 3 or 4 newspapers were dominant news sources in New York City. They're less dominant, and the largest one, the New York Times, is a national enterprise, in many ways much more than it is a local enterprise. What's the opportunity for WNYC as you see it, and where does it fit?
Well, I think, I think that New York is experiencing what all other local communities are experiencing. We were a city that not too long ago had probably a dozen daily newspapers that covered the city and the different communities that of the city really deeply every single day, and those have, for all intents and purposes gone away. So, the Daily News, the New York Post, the New York Post is really I would say, is not really covering New York. The Daily News, I think at this point has a smaller newsroom than we have. There are some new operations. So the city that launched, I think about 2 years ago now. There are new entrants that are starting to fill the void. But I think that the opportunity for WNYC is really to fill the void and play the role that the local newspapers used to play, 5, 10, 15 years ago. And I think, the New York Times, as you said, has a large, metro a team that is covering New York. But, I would say whether this is fair or not, my assessment is that, they cover New York as a national story. So, we are a city that is of interest. What happens in the cities is of interest to people not that only live in this city. And I think that is the way the New York Times sort of approaches it, is really, what are those stories that it would be interesting to a national audience? Mm-hmm. For us, it is really about what are the stories that are important and necessary to people that live in this community. I think one other thing, if I can add, is that I think the other, the other really big key differentiator is that, we are quickly, becoming the only free source of information for people as well. And I think that I greatly admire what the New York Times has done in terms of really turning itself into a dominant subscription service and really relying on subscription revenue to reverse their fortunes. And I think they've done an amazing job. But at the end of the day, access to this kind of information it needs to be available to everyone, no matter, what their means are. And I think that is also a place where we can play a role that others cannot play.
That's a grand mandate you just articulated for WNYC and its role in New York City. I mean, you basically said you'd like to be the #1 news source in New York. And are you resourced to do that? And are you in a position really to reach such a ambitious goal?
Well, I think, ambitious goals are something you build towards, right? So I've been here 9 months, so I might need a bit more time. But I think, look, we have a newsroom of very talented reporters and producers and editors today. And I think that, again, if you look at the coverage that we've been doing, the traffic to our website doubled in March. And I think, what we heard over and over again from people is that we were the only place they knew they could go that was giving them up-to-date information. If you remember, in those early days, there was just a lot of confusion. The mayor would say one thing, the governor would say something else, and no one really knew, were we shutting down? Were we not shutting down? Was this thing open? Was that, and we started this, really sort of an ongoing blog that we kept on updating, as we got information. And that really became a key source of information. And then very early on, we started, we built this sort of statistics tracker, right? So we built sort of a destination where you could go and look at all of the data on a daily basis, the number of hospitalizations, the number of deaths, the number of cases, just so that, we were keeping track of all of the data that was coming out of the city and the state and putting it in one place so that people had access to it. So I think that, look, this is not something that's going to be built or done in a day, a week, a year. I think that, we're in this for the long haul. That building, the #1 newsroom in New York is something, and in many ways, I'm not sure I sort of think of it in those terms. I think of it as building really a large newsroom that can meet the needs of this community. And we happen to serve a community that is pretty big.
So Merrill, speaking of building newsrooms, can you tell our audience a little bit more about what TNP does?
Alex, thanks. So we're trying at the News Project, working with local newsrooms and with newsrooms covering undercover topics, to give them a comprehensive technology platform and the advisory services they need around things like paywall, things like new advertising and sponsorship opportunities. Our guest mentioned the work that the New York Times has done in building reader revenue. That's really important to us. Here you have a look at 8 things we do. We have a content management system. We've built it for convenience. We're a bunch of industry experts like Alex and our large team. We help people build partnerships. So we can help newsrooms accomplish a lot of what they need to get accomplished, and can help entrepreneurs with good ideas fulfill those dreams in terms of starting new newsrooms. So please be in touch with us if you're interested in working with the News Project. You can reach me at merrill@thenewsproject.net, or you can reach Alex at alex@thenewsproject.net. And by the way, we have an inventory now of 10 programs that are part of the News Project Live series. You can see all of those programs, and you can on the screen now see some of the guests we've had. You can see all of those programs at our website, the News Project Live. They include discussions of where we are in advertising, a show with Brian Stelter of CNN. Just a couple of weeks ago, we interviewed Goli's compatriot in public media in New York, the president of WNYC, Neil Shapiro. And those shows, in most cases, are as interesting and valuable in our library as they were when we recorded them a couple of weeks ago. So tune in, and please let your friends know that they can see this program anytime they want on demand as well. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for letting us tell you more about the News Project. Alex?
Thanks, Merrill. Goli, how do you see WNYC competing for contributor dollars in the context of this economic downturn and continuing uncertainty around the virus?
You know, I mean, that is, I would say, one of the most, I think amazing things about our listeners is the level of loyalty they have to the station. And we had one of the things that we're also famous for is our pledge drives. And when the pandemic happened in March, we had a pledge drive planned for May. And so we quickly again, that was something that we had never just imagined having to do remotely. Usually the way pledge drives work is that, 2 people sit in a studio and, they kind of talk back and forth and, make a good pitch and case for support. And a lot of it is actually about being together and doing it as a team. And so thinking about, okay, how are we going to do these pledge drives remotely was yet another challenge we had to figure out. But we did, and we had a pledge drive in May that actually way exceeded our expectations, and it was the second highest membership revenue month we have had in our history. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, because people were so reliant on us, they were also there for us when we asked them to support us. And I've worked for a lot of media organizations in my career, and the level of loyalty, and I would say really love. I mean, it's not like love is not a word that you usually use about media brands and their relationship with their readers and users. But I think for public radio listeners, there really is there is a true relationship there. And so, thus far, not only have we not seen a dip in membership, but actually we've seen an uptick in membership revenue. Now, what we don't know is really, I think, what is so uncertain right now is really around, how long is this crisis going to last? And then what is the impact the long-term impact on the economy, right? So because I think that people are generous, but at the end of the day, you know, their own sort of financial needs also impact their ability to give. So that is where the uncertainty is right now, is what does the economy look like? Are people going to be in a position to help us?
Yeah.
How do you see the revenue mix changing over time, Goli? More sponsorship foundation dollars, more membership dollars? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't see the mix changing. I mean, I think if you're asking about short term, I mean, I think, you know, short term, we have seen a decline in our sponsorship revenue, like all of our peers. You know, advertising dollars obviously are down, but I think that, you know, 50% of our support comes from individuals, and so that's, you know, that is anywhere, you know, most of that is from people that give us on average $150, $160 a year. But then it is also the people that are giving us, you know, 5-figure, 6-figure gifts as well. And so it really, you know, it is across that entire spectrum. So I think individual giving for us will always be the main source of revenue. And I think that's actually what makes us as sustainable as we are, is that we're relying on a large number of people giving us small amounts of money to make this operation work. But, you know, we're also fortunate that, you know, we have individual giving, we have sponsorship, we have institutional giving. You know, so we have 3 sources of revenue that we can rely on, and that is also rather unique in the media landscape.
Yeah. Goli, we have another question from a viewer, from Horatio Svengali. Goli, what are some of the things you've done or are excited about doing to ensure a safer workplace for women employees?
Well, you know, I think that that is a conversation, you know, both from the perspective of, you know, I think if you think about sort of what started 2 years ago with the Me Too movement, and really making sure that we had in place, or we were building a culture where people feel comfortable and safe coming forward with their concerns and their and any sort of workplace issues that they are facing. So I think that the first thing is really about putting in place the structures and systems needed that where people feel supported and people know where to go and what the process is. If they are experiencing, you know, something that is challenging in the workplace. And I think that a lot of it is also about making sure that we are setting the right cultural expectations of what we will, what our culture, you know, what behaviors we allow and what behaviors we will not, you know, stand for. And making sure that we are consistent in those, and then also very basic things like making sure we are providing, you know, ongoing, you know, annual training. We're actually just having the conversation today. We train the entire organization every year on, you know, harassment and bullying, and making sure again that from managers have specific training, and then the entire staff gets trained on what is appropriate and what is not appropriate in the workplace.
We want to remind our listeners to please ping us with your questions. Send us your questions for our guest, Goli Sheikholeslami, and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to record that on the screen as well with our audience, which is many cases from around the world. But I wanted to follow up on that last question. The WNYC newsroom, like most big city newsrooms, is going through a challenging period, reconciling the impact of the protests, social change, and really important diversity concerns. You've hired a new editor, Audrey Cooper, from outside New York. Tell us a little more about how change is being handled at WNYC.
I think that, as you said, like every other newsroom in this country and really every other organization, I think that we are having a conversation inside our organization in many ways that is long overdue. I mean, I think that as an industry, I think the news organizations have long set the goal of building newsrooms that are representative of the communities that they serve. And the truth is, we're sitting here in 2020 and we have failed to do that. And so I think that the conversation that we are having is really about how we're going to stop just talking about it and actually do it and do something about it. And that really, in a city as diverse as New York City, I think that you asked me earlier about my vision and, for the organization. I think that those two things for me are very connected, that our ability to serve our community, our ability to really be a voice for our community can only happen if we represent that community inside our building. So, how to when we decide what we're going to cover every day, we used to sort of sit around together. Now we sit around on a Zoom call every day and decide what are we going to cover? How are we going to cover it? Well, if we don't have the right voices in that conversation, we're not going to be covering the right things and we're not going to be covering them the right way. So for us right now, it is really our focus is on change is on two levels. One is about representation and how do we build a more diverse newsroom. So right now, 31% of our newsroom is people of color make up 31% of our newsroom. It's better than the national average, which I think is in the low 20%, but still it by no means represents New York City. And the other big conversation we're having is really around how do we build the systems and structures internally to support our Black journalists and our journalists of color, make sure that they we have means of developing them and allowing them to build a career and retaining them in our organization. So those are really the two big conversations we're having.
And talk to us about the new editor. It's a very important hire in a very important market at a very important time. Audrey
Yep.
Cooper comes from the San Francisco Chronicle.
She does. So Audrey, was I think the youngest woman ever named to run a newsroom when she became editor-in-chief of the Chronicle in 2015. And for those who don't know Audrey, she is not only an excellent journalist, but she is someone who I would say took over at the Chronicle at a time when its future was quite uncertain. I mean, I think the Chronicle was if you think of it 5 or 6 years ago, really it was very uncertain whether the paper would survive. And I think that Audrey's commitment to excellent journalism and quality journalism and really thinking about the reader and the community, and then also thinking about how to build a newsroom that is, made up of reporters that feel that they are being supported and given the ability to do their best work, has allowed the Chronicle to really sort of reverse its fortunes. She ran a 200-person newsroom, and she has a reputation for being one of the best leaders in news organizations, and so we're thrilled that she's going to be joining us.
It's so great. So Goli, you came to New York Public Radio, but you were at Chicago Public Media before. How do those two cities compare in terms of what you've done there?
I think that I would say that in many ways, in many respects, it's not dissimilar. I mean, I think that, in Chicago, it was a similar situation where, when I got there, the two main newspapers, the Tribune and the Sun-Times, had been experiencing challenges, but over my 5 years there, both of those organizations really saw their newsrooms shrink and change, and so again, a city. Chicago is the third largest market in the United States, and we were quickly becoming a city that really may not have a sort of large newsroom to support it. And so at BEZ, our focus again was, how can we expand the organization so that we can invest in our newsroom. And so I was very proud of sort of what we did in my 5 years there of really building a much larger newsroom and doing some really terrific work. And so from that perspective, it's not that different. I would say, what's happening in Chicago, what's happening in New York, they're obviously, cities that have similar issues but also, have their own unique challenges. But I think at its core, the story of, the lack of access to local news. I'll give you an example. In Chicago, we had the only reporter on our politics. We were the only news organization with a reporter that had someone covering the county, so the Cook County and the sort of policies that were being made at the county level, and that was was somewhat astounding to me that a county as big as Cook County, none of the news organizations had the resources. We had the largest education desk in Chicago, we had 4 dedicated reporters to education. There was a time where the Tribune had 14 reporters dedicated to education. They were down to half of one person by the time I got to Chicago. So I think that again, that really the challenges in both cities are not that dissimilar when it comes to what's happened to the local news ecosystem.
Goli, we spent almost this entire conversation talking about news, and obviously your organization is much more than news. You're an important cultural organization. You have a role to play in bringing New York culture, especially at this moment in time when Broadway shows are not operating. Shakespeare in the Park won't be operating in New York this summer, and yet you're trying to fill that void as well. Tell us a little bit more about the organization's relationship with the arts here in New York and around the country.
Yeah, I think that, we both through WNYC, but also through WQXR, which is our classical music station, we really have always had very strong relationships with the cultural institutions in New York. But there are things that we are doing now that I don't think, again, anyone would have contemplated. I mean, this week, starting on Monday and ending this evening, we are airing Richard II, sort of, taking Shakespeare in the Park. So, the play that was supposed to be done at the Delacorte Theater in Central Park, due to COVID was canceled. The whole summer series was canceled. And so, we started talking with the Public Theater about, what it would mean to bring, that play to the radio. Radio plays, I think have not really been a thing for probably 60 plus years. But if it was an amazing cast that was initially somewhat skeptical of what does it mean to do Shakespeare as a radio play. But it's really been a wonderful collaboration. And I think if, the play is actually available as a podcast as well. And it's just really, it's you just, it's one of those experiences that, going in, one of the questions we had was, are people really going to be able to have the patience to listen to Shakespearean, a Shakespeare play on the radio? And honestly, it's like, the first night when I was listening, 40 minutes into, the hour, I looked at the clock and I thought to myself, oh my God, this is so great. I don't want it to be over. So we really, it is, I think, allowed us to do certain things. And it has also allowed cultural institutions to think of their the way they do things differently. I think that, the Shakespeare in the Park is always, the core of it has always been about it's free, but it's always been about, giving access to, this beautiful thing to as many people as possible. Putting it on the radio allows, the Public Theater to just extend the access to it to an even much broader audience. And on the QXR side, we have very deep relationships with Lincoln Center and Carnegie Hall, and the Philharmonic, and really working closely with those partners and helping them, continue to bring their programming to audiences, even though they can't do it in person and live.
So Goli, we have a question from one of our viewers, Peter. How would you define your website strategy as opposed to your on-air strategy?
I think that I think the COVID crisis was in some ways a perfect example of why you need both. And I think that, what is amazing about the radio and is sort of that intimacy and sort of the conversation that you can have, and the engagement that you can have on the radio. What the website allows you to provide, our users and readers is really the 24/7 access. So I think that, during this COVID crisis, the Gothamist, our website, gothamist.com, was able to, continuously cover the story as it was happening, and allow people to have access to it, at their own, leisure. And I think the radio is one of those things. One of the drawbacks of radio is that it is ephemeral. If you're not there at the moment something is being aired, then you're going to miss it. And so having, I think, both the ability to, the permanency of sort of a website, plus the intimacy of radio. So what we're able to do on the Brian Lehrer show, for example, of, opening up the phone lines, allowing people to call in and ask their questions and give their feedback, talk to the mayor once a week. Those are things you can only really do in an audio radio environment. And so I think we're, very fortunate that, we have two platforms that really complement each other very well.
Goli, thank you for that. And we will certainly be encouraging people to look into the cultural opportunities that you folks are offering, especially at this moment of still quasi-lockdown in New York City. So thank you. And thank you for joining us tonight. We've covered an enormous amount of territory, and One point I want to make sure we make as we wrap up the show tonight is there's so much about public radio that's instructive for lots of people thinking about the news industry. You have figured out reader revenue at a level that we wish all our customers and lots of other people in media do, whether it's, the cliche about the tote bag, or even more importantly, the level of engagement that great public radio stations give their audiences. There's so much for local news organizations to learn from that and take to heart. And we at our company believe strongly that the future of media is reader revenue, and WNYC and other public radio stations demonstrate the importance of getting people to contribute and support local media every day. So there's a lot to learn there. We've learned a lot from this conversation. Goli, thank you for joining us. And thank everyone for listening from remote parts of the country. Hopefully you learned a lot about an important outlet that you can listen to, whether you're sitting in an apartment in New York City as Goli is, or whether you're sitting in Southern Oregon as our listener Peter is. So we're all national media in that sense, and hopefully that collaborative and sharing process came through in all that WNYC offers from our conversation today. So also good luck, Goli, in trying to fill the giant news void that is this large metropolitan area that is too often too undercovered, and hopefully you'll be succeeding in a great deal of that mission you've set out for yourself. And again, thanks for joining us. To our listeners, Goli, I'm sorry.
I said thank you.
Sure, it's a pleasure. And to our listeners, please join us again next week when we'll have a really special program about disinformation that should be very enlightening about a really important topic. So please tune in. You'll be hearing more about that program from our promotion leading up to it. Have a good week, everybody. Alex, thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you again next Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern for another edition of the News Project Live. And thank you for watching.